The stage rattled into Paso Robles, California, on a blistering afternoon in July of 1876, carrying a woman who had not eaten in 2 days because the fear in her stomach left no room for food. Margaret Turner clutched her small carpetbag against her chest and watched through the dusty window as wooden buildings emerged from the heat shimmer like ships materializing from fog. She was 22 years old, had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Pennsylvania, and every muscle in her body was tensed for the first blow. The stage driver called out their arrival, and Margaret forced herself to stand on trembling legs. Her dress was wrinkled and stained from the long journey, her dark hair coming loose from its pins. She knew she looked terrible. That would make him angry. Everything made men angry. She stepped down onto the wooden sidewalk and squinted against the bright California sun. The town was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of weathered buildings lining a wide dirt street. A saloon, a general store, a hotel, a blacksmith's forge sending sparks into the afternoon air. And there, standing beside a hitching post with his hat in his hands, was the man who had paid for her passage west. Samuel Xavier was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. He wore a clean shirt and pants, boots that had been recently polished. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30. His face was angular, weathered by outdoor work, and his eyes were a startling shade of blue-green that reminded her of the sea she had crossed once as a child. Those eyes were nervous as they met hers. "Miss Turner?" His voice was deep but soft, with a slight hesitation that surprised her. "Yes." She kept her gaze down, her shoulders hunched. Submissive. That was safest. "I'm Samuel Xavier. I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." He took a step toward her, and she flinched backwards so violently that she nearly dropped her bag. Samuel froze, his hand still partially extended. Confusion crossed his face, followed by concern. "Miss Turner? Are you all right?" She could not answer. Her throat had closed with panic. He had only reached toward her bag, she realized now, to help carry it. But the movement had been so sudden, and she had learned to expect pain from sudden movements. "I won't hurt you," Samuel said quietly, lowering his hand. "I was just going to carry your bag for you. But you can hold on to it if you prefer." Margaret stared at him, trying to reconcile his gentle tone with her expectations. In his letters, he had seemed kind, but men's letters always seemed kind. It was later, behind closed doors, that the truth emerged. "I can carry it," she whispered. "All right." Samuel settled his hat back on his head and gestured down the street. "My ranch is about 3 miles outside of town. I have a wagon here. We can go whenever you're ready." He paused, then added, "Unless you'd like to rest first, get something to eat, the hotel has a decent dining room." "Whatever you prefer, sir." The words came automatically, the proper response. "I'd prefer whatever makes you comfortable," Samuel said, and there was something in his voice that made her glance up at him. He looked genuinely concerned, genuinely uncertain. "You must be tired and hungry after such a long journey. Let's get you fed before we head out to the ranch." He walked beside her, but not too close, maintaining a careful distance that both confused and relieved her. The hotel dining room was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and windows that let in the afternoon light. Samuel pulled out a chair for her, and she sat quickly, smoothing her skirt with shaking hands. The waitress brought coffee and bread, then took their order. Margaret could barely speak, so Samuel ordered beef stew for both of them. When the waitress left, an awkward silence fell over the table. "The trip from Pennsylvania," Samuel began, then cleared his throat. "That must have taken, 2 weeks?" 16 days. Margaret kept her eyes on her coffee cup. "That's a long time to be traveling." He wrapped his hands around his own cup, and she noticed his fingers were calloused and scarred from work. "I hope the accommodations weren't too rough." "They were fine, sir." "You don't have to call me sir," he said gently. "Samuel is fine. Or Sam, if you prefer." She nodded but did not respond. The food arrived, and she forced herself to eat slowly, though her empty stomach demanded she devour everything in sight. Ladies ate slowly. Ladies who ate too fast got punished. Samuel ate quietly, occasionally glancing at her with an expression she could not quite read. Finally, he set down his spoon and said, "Miss Turner, I want you to know that I meant everything I wrote in my letters. I'm looking for a wife and a partner, not a servant. My ranch is small, but it's growing. I work hard, but I'm fair. I hope we can build a good life together." "Yes, sir," Margaret said automatically. "Samuel," he corrected gently. "Samuel." The name felt strange in her mouth. They finished their meal in silence, and then Samuel paid the bill and led her out to where his wagon waited. It was a sturdy farm wagon, the bed filled with supplies he had apparently picked up in town. He helped her onto the bench seat, his touch so light and brief that it barely registered, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. The road out of town was dusty and rutted, winding through dry grassland dotted with oak trees. The July heat pressed down like a weight, and Margaret felt sweat trickling down her back beneath her dress. Samuel kept the horses at a steady walk, not pushing them in the heat. "It's beautiful country," he said after a while, gesturing at the rolling hills. "Dry this time of year, but in spring everything turns green. We get enough rain in winter to keep the creeks running most of the year. Good grazing for cattle." "Do you have many cattle?" Margaret asked, then immediately wished she had stayed silent. Questions could be dangerous, but Samuel seemed pleased that she had spoken. "About 200 head right now. I'm hoping to increase that over the next few years. I've got good pasture land and water rights to a creek that runs through the property. With help, I think we could build something substantial." "We." He kept saying "we." Margaret did not know what to make of that. The ranch appeared gradually, materializing from the landscape like it had grown there naturally. The house was made of wood with a covered porch, single story but larger than Margaret had expected. Behind it stood a barn, several corrals, and a few outbuildings. Everything looked well maintained, the fences straight and sturdy, the barn door hanging properly on its hinges. "Home," Samuel said simply, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of the house. Margaret climbed down before he could help her and stood uncertainly, her bag clutched in her hands. The house looked peaceful in the late afternoon light, almost welcoming. That made her more nervous. Her stepfather's house had looked peaceful too from the outside. Samuel began unloading supplies from the wagon bed. "Let me show you inside," he said, picking up a crate of goods. "You can choose whichever room you'd like. There are 3 bedrooms. I've been using the one off the kitchen, but you can have any of them you prefer." She followed him into the house, her footsteps quiet on the wooden porch. The front door opened into a main room that served as both living area and dining room, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a large table with chairs. Everything was neat, but clearly belonged to a man living alone. No curtains on the windows, no decorations on the walls, a stack of books on a side table that had probably never been properly shelved. "Kitchen is through here," Samuel said, leading her to the back. The kitchen was spacious, with a large cast-iron stove, a wooden counter for food preparation, and shelves stocked with supplies. A door off the kitchen opened to a bedroom, small but adequate, with a narrow bed and a dresser. "This is where I've been sleeping, and the other 2 bedrooms are down that hallway off the main room." Margaret walked back through and found the hallway. The first bedroom was larger, with a double bed, a wardrobe, and a window looking out toward the hills. The second was smaller, with a single bed and a smaller window. "Like I said, you can have whichever you prefer," Samuel said from behind her. "Or I can move my things out to the barn if you'd rather have the place to yourself for a while. Whatever makes you comfortable." She turned to look at him, this strange man who kept offering her choices. "I don't understand." "What don't you understand?" "What do you want from me?" The words burst out before she could stop them. Samuel set down the crate he had been holding and removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. I want what I wrote in my letters, a wife, a partner, someone to share this life with, someone to talk to in the evenings and wake up beside in the mornings, someone to build a future with. He paused, meeting her eyes. I'm lonely out here, Miss Turner. This is good land, and I'm proud of what I've built, but it's a hard life to live alone. I want a family, children eventually, if we're blessed with them. I want someone who will care about this ranch the way I do, who will work alongside me to make it prosper. And in return? Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. In return? Samuel looked confused. This will be your home, your ranch as much as mine, your money as much as mine, your decisions as much as mine. He took a step closer, then seemed to catch himself and stopped. Miss Turner, what did you think would be expected of you? She could not answer that, could not put into words the brutal lessons she had learned from watching her mother cower, from feeling her stepfather's fists, from hearing the screams through thin walls. Could not explain that she had answered his advertisement because she had nowhere else to go, because her stepfather had made it clear she could not stay, because marriage to a stranger 2,000 miles away seemed safer than staying in Pennsylvania. I'll do whatever you want, she said instead. I'll cook and clean and keep the house. I'll work hard. I won't complain. I'll be obedient. Just please don't. Her voice broke, and she could not finish. Don't what? Samuel asked gently. Margaret looked down at her hands, at the old scars across her knuckles from trying to protect her face, at the newer bruise on her wrist from where her stepfather had grabbed her before she left. Don't hurt me, she whispered. The silence that followed was so complete she could hear the clock ticking in the other room, could hear the sound of horses moving in the corral outside. She did not dare look up. She had revealed too much, shown too much weakness. Now he would know how easy she was to control, how thoroughly she had already been broken. Margaret, his voice was rough with emotion. Look at me, please. She forced herself to raise her eyes. Samuel's face was stricken, his jaw tight, his eyes bright with something that might have been anger or might have been pain. I will never hurt you, he said, each word deliberate and clear. Never. Not with my hands, not with my words, not in any way. What you're describing, what you're afraid of, that's not marriage. That's not partnership. That's not what I want or what you deserve. But I'm your wife, Margaret said, confused. When we marry, you'll have the right. No, Samuel cut her off, his voice firm. No man has the right to hurt a woman. I don't care what the law says about a man's rights over his wife. It's wrong. It's cowardly. It's evil. He took a shaky breath. Someone hurt you. Someone hurt you badly enough that you came all the way across the country expecting more of the same. And I swear to you on my honor and my life that will not happen here. Margaret stared at him, wanting desperately to believe him, but not quite daring to. You say that now. I'll say it every day for the rest of my life if that's what it takes for you to believe me. Samuel kept his distance, but his eyes held hers. You don't have to marry me right away. Take your time. Get to know me. See how I treat you, how I treat the animals, how I handle anger and frustration. Judge me by my actions, not my words. And if you decide you don't want to stay, I'll pay for your passage back east or wherever you want to go, no conditions. You would let me leave? She could not imagine any man saying such a thing, let alone meaning it. I would hate it, Samuel admitted. I've been looking forward to your arrival for months. But yes, if you're unhappy, if you're afraid, if you decide this isn't the life you want, I'll let you go. I want a willing partner, not a prisoner. Margaret's legs suddenly felt weak. She reached out to steady herself against the doorframe, and Samuel moved toward her instinctively. She flinched again, and he immediately stopped, holding his hands up where she could see them. You should rest, he said. You've had a long journey and a lot thrown at you today. Take the big bedroom. I'll move my things to the smaller one. You can lock the door if it makes you feel safer. I'll start dinner in about an hour, and I'll call you when it's ready. All right? She nodded, unable to form words. Samuel retreated to the small bedroom and returned with an armful of clothes, which he carried to the other room. Then he brought out a few personal items, a shaving kit, a photograph in a frame, a small wooden box. He worked quietly and efficiently, never rushing, always keeping his distance from her. When he had finished, he paused in the hallway. There's fresh water in the pitcher on the dresser and towels in the wardrobe. If you need anything, just call out. I'll be in the kitchen or out doing evening chores. Then he was gone, and Margaret was alone. She stood frozen for a long moment, listening to his footsteps fade toward the back of the house, listening to the front door open and close as he went outside. Slowly, like a wild animal approaching a trap, she entered the large bedroom. It was simply furnished but clean, the bed made up with what looked like new linens. The window had no curtains, but she could see no other houses, no other people, just rolling hills and scattered oak trees and the vast California sky. The isolation that should have frightened her instead felt like safety. Margaret set down her carpet bag and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was soft, far softer than the one she had slept on in her stepfather's house. She looked around the room, at the empty wardrobe waiting for her few possessions, at the dresser with its washing pitcher and bowl, at the rag rug on the floor that someone had carefully braided. Then, for the first time in years, Margaret Turner allowed herself to cry. She curled up on that soft bed and wept for her lost childhood, for her mother who had died too soon, for the frightened girl she had been and the broken woman she had become. She cried for all the times she had bitten back screams, for all the bruises she had hidden, for all the small ways she had learned to make herself smaller and quieter and less. She did not hear the door to the house open, did not hear Samuel's footsteps in the hallway, did not know he was there until she heard his voice, tentative and concerned. "Margaret, are you all right?" She sat up quickly, wiping at her face, trying to compose herself. But the tears would not stop, and she found she did not have the strength to pretend anymore. Samuel stood in the doorway, not entering the room, his face creased with worry. "I'm sorry," she gasped out between sobs. "I'm sorry, I'll stop. Don't apologize." Samuel took one step into the room, then hesitated. "May I come closer?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He crossed the room slowly and sat down on the edge of the bed, maintaining a careful distance between them. He did not touch her, did not demand explanations. He simply sat there, solid and present and calm. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "Whatever happened before, whoever hurt you, they can't reach you here. You're safe." The kindness in his voice broke something in her, some last wall she had been holding up through sheer will. Margaret buried her face in her hands and sobbed harder, her whole body shaking with the force of her grief and relief and confusion. And then, so slowly she barely registered it happening, Samuel's arm came around her shoulders. She tensed, waiting for the grip to tighten, for the gentleness to transform into violence. But it did not happen. His arm stayed light and loose, offering comfort but no constraint. She could have pulled away at any moment. Instead, she found herself leaning into him, accepting the support of his solid presence. "That's it," Samuel murmured. "Let it out. You're all right. I've got you." Margaret cried until she had no tears left, and through it all Samuel held her. Not restraining, not demanding, just holding her while she wept. His shirt grew damp beneath her cheek, but he did not complain or push her away. He simply let her cry, let her release all the fear and pain she had been carrying. When the tears finally subsided, Margaret pulled back, embarrassed by her loss of control. She could not meet his eyes. "I'm sorry. That was unseemly. That was human," Samuel corrected gently. He stood and went to the dresser, poured water into the basin, and brought it back with a cloth. "Here, this will help." She took the cool, damp cloth gratefully and pressed it against her swollen eyes. Samuel returned the basin to the dresser and then stood awkwardly, clearly unsure whether to stay or go. "Who hurt you?" he asked finally. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I'd like to understand." Margaret lowered the cloth and stared at the way her tears had darkened the fabric. "My stepfather," she said quietly. "After my mother died. I was 14. He was angry all the time, at everything. The food was too hot or too cold, the house too dirty, or I had used too much soap cleaning it. I was too loud or too quiet, or I looked at him wrong, or I did not look at him enough." The words came faster now, spilling out. "Nothing I did was right. Nothing made him happy. And when he got angry, he used his fists. For 8 years?" Samuel's voice was tight. "Until I was old enough to leave. But I had nowhere to go, no money, no family. And then I saw your advertisement." She looked up at him finally. "I thought anywhere had to be better than there. Even if you turned out to be just as bad, at least it would be different for a while. At least I would have tried." Samuel's hands were clenched into fists at his sides, but when he spoke, his voice was controlled. "Your stepfather is a coward and a brute, and I'm sorry you endured that. No child should have to live in fear. No woman should have to run across a continent to escape violence." He took a breath, visibly steadying himself. "I can't undo what was done to you, but I can promise you that this will be different. I will be different." "Why?" Margaret asked. "Why does it matter to you?" Most men are better than your stepfather," Samuel interrupted. "And the ones who aren't should be horsewhipped." He sat back down on the bed, though he kept more distance this time. "My father died when I was 12, thrown from a horse, and I watched my mother struggle to keep our farm going, watched neighbors and supposed friends try to cheat her, watched men dismiss her opinions because she was a woman alone. She was strong and smart, and she taught me to respect women, to see them as equals, not property." His voice softened. "She died 3 years ago. Pneumonia. Before she passed, she made me promise that when I married, I would treat my wife the way my father had treated her, as a partner and an equal." "You loved her," Margaret said. "Very much." Samuel smiled sadly. "She would have liked you, I think. She always admired courage, and it takes courage to start over the way you have." "I don't feel courageous. I feel terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's action despite fear." He stood again, heading toward the door. "I'll leave you to rest. Dinner will be ready soon, but don't feel obligated to join me if you'd rather be alone. I can leave a plate outside your door." "Samuel?" Margaret called as he reached the hallway. He turned back and she forced herself to hold his gaze. "Thank you. For holding me. For letting me cry. For not being angry." "I'm never going to be angry at you for having feelings," Samuel said firmly. "Cry when you need to. Laugh when you can. Speak your mind always. That's what I want from you, your genuine self. Not some performance of what you think I want." After he left, Margaret sat in the growing dusk and thought about his words. Her genuine self. She was not sure she knew who that was anymore. That girl had been buried under years of fear and violence. But perhaps here, in this strange new place, with this strange, gentle man, she could excavate herself. Perhaps she could learn who Margaret Turner actually was underneath all the survival strategies. She washed her face properly and tidied her hair, then ventured out into the main room. The smell of cooking meat and vegetables drew her toward the kitchen, where she found Samuel stirring a pot at the stove. He looked up when she entered and offered a tentative smile. "Feeling a bit better?" "Yes, thank you." She hesitated, then added, "Can I help?" "If you'd like. Could you slice that bread?" "Knife's on the counter." They worked in companionable silence, Margaret slicing bread while Samuel finished the stew and set the table. It felt strangely normal, almost comfortable. When they sat down to eat, Margaret found she actually had an appetite. "Tell me about the ranch," she said, surprising herself. "How did you come to be here?" Samuel's face brightened, and he began to talk about the land, about buying it 5 years ago with money his mother had left him, about the hard work of building the house and barn, about the satisfaction of watching his cattle herd grow. He talked about his hopes for the future, about eventually hiring ranch hands, about breeding better stock, about maybe growing some crops in addition to raising cattle. But that's enough about me, he said eventually. What about you? What did you do back in Pennsylvania? I worked in a textile mill for a few years, Margaret said. Before that, I kept house for my stepfather. I can cook and clean and sew. I can read and write and do basic arithmetic. My mother taught me before she died. Can you ride a horse? No, we never had horses. I'll teach you if you'd like, Samuel offered. It's useful out here, and the land is beautiful to explore on horseback. The idea of being on a horse terrified her, another large, unpredictable creature that could hurt her, but she nodded anyway. That would be helpful. They finished dinner, and Margaret insisted on washing the dishes while Samuel went out to check on the animals one last time before full dark. She found the task soothing, the warm water and simple repetitive motions. When Samuel returned, she had the kitchen clean and was wiping down the table. You didn't have to do all that, he said. I wanted to. You cooked, so I should clean. We can trade off, or do it together, whatever works. Samuel hung his hat by the door and stretched, rolling his shoulders. I'm going to turn in soon. Early start tomorrow. But you're welcome to stay up if you're not tired. There are books if you like to read, or there's writing paper in the desk if you want to write letters. I don't have anyone to write to, Margaret said without thinking, then wished she could take the words back. They revealed too much. But Samuel just looked sad. Well, you have me now, and eventually you'll meet folks in town, make friends. Paso Robles is small, but most people are kind. He paused at the hallway. Sleep well, Margaret. And remember, your door has a lock if you need it. Good night, Samuel. She did lock the door that night, not because she truly believed he would hurt her, but because the habit was too ingrained to break immediately. She lay in the darkness and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch animals moving, wind in the trees, the house settling. It was so different from the city sounds she was used to, the clatter of machinery and voices through thin walls. Margaret thought about Samuel's arms around her, the way he had held her while she cried. She could not remember the last time someone had touched her gently. Her mother, perhaps, before she died. 8 years of flinching from every raised hand, of tensing at every loud voice. 8 years of making herself small and silent and invisible. But Samuel did not seem to want her invisible. He wanted her to speak her mind, to be her genuine self, to participate in decisions. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. She fell asleep thinking about his promise. I will never hurt you. 4 words that might change everything. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that Margaret found both strange and comforting. Samuel rose early and did his morning chores, then came in for breakfast that they prepared together. He would head out to work on the ranch mending fences, checking on cattle, the 100 tasks that kept the place running, while Margaret cleaned the house and started learning her way around the kitchen and property. He never ordered her to do anything. Instead, he would say things like, I was planning to ride out to the north pasture today, or the barn could use mucking out when there's time, and then leave it to her to decide how to spend her day. It was unnerving. On the 3rd day, frustrated by her own uncertainty, Margaret confronted him at breakfast. Just tell me what you want me to do. I don't understand this game. Samuel set down his coffee cup and looked at her thoughtfully. It's not a game. I'm trying to give you freedom to make choices. But you must have expectations. Tasks you need done. Of course I do. The house needs tending. Meals need cooking. There's always work to be done. But I'm not going to bark orders at you like you're a servant. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. Margaret, I want you to take ownership of this place. Decide what needs doing and do it, or tell me it needs doing and I'll help. If you want to reorganize the kitchen, do it. If you think we need different supplies from town, make a list. If you see a problem, fix it or tell me about it. This is your home. Act like it. I don't know how, she admitted quietly. Then learn, I'll help you. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close. I know this is all new and strange, but I have faith that you'll figure it out. You're smart and capable. You survived 8 years of hell and came out the other side. Running a ranch house should be nothing compared to that. His confidence in her was bewildering. Margaret had spent so long being told she was stupid, clumsy, worthless. Having someone express faith in her abilities felt like being handed a gift she did not know how to unwrap. She threw herself into work, partly because there was genuinely much to do, and partly because work kept her from thinking too hard about her confused feelings. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, organized shelves that were already tidy, and began planning a garden for the spring. Samuel praised her efforts without being condescending, and often joined her in the evening to help with whatever projects she had started. He was teaching her about the ranch, too, walking her around the property and explaining how everything worked. She learned to identify which cattle belonged to them by their brand, learned about water rights and grazing rotation, learned the names of the neighboring ranchers and the basics of the local economy. Why are you teaching me all this? She asked one afternoon as they stood on a hill overlooking his land. This is men's work. It's ranch work, Samuel corrected. And you live on a ranch. You should understand how it operates. He pointed toward a distant line of trees. That's the creek I told you about. In spring, it runs high enough to need careful watching. In late summer, it's mostly just pools, but it never fully dries up, which is why this land is so valuable. Margaret studied the landscape, trying to see it the way he did. It was beautiful in its stark way, all golden grass and blue sky and dark green oaks, so different from Pennsylvania's rolling green hills and dense forests. Do you ever miss the East? Sometimes, Samuel admitted. I miss the trees, the rain, the seasons being more distinct. But this place gets in your blood. There's a freedom here, a sense of possibility, like you can build anything if you're willing to work for it. He glanced at her. Do you miss Pennsylvania? No. The word came out more vehement than she intended. I miss my mother. I miss who I was before she died. But the place itself, the life I had there, I don't miss any of it. Then maybe California can be a fresh start, a place to figure out who you are now. She wanted to believe that, wanted to believe she could shed her past like a snake sheds its skin and emerge new and whole. But the fear was still there, coiled in her chest, ready to strike at any sudden movement or raised voice. Samuel proved patient with her skittishness. When she flinched at unexpected sounds, he would speak calmly and move slowly. When she apologized excessively, he would gently remind her that she had done nothing wrong. When she asked permission to do basic things, use supplies, move furniture, go outside, he would patiently remind her that she did not need his permission. This is your home, he repeated over and over. You don't need to ask if you can take a walk or bake a pie or rearrange the furniture. Just do what feels right. At night, they would sit in the main room, Samuel reading or working on ranch accounts, while Margaret sewed or read from his small collection of books. It was peaceful in a way she had never experienced, this quiet companionship with no undercurrent of threat. Sometimes they talked, sharing stories from their pasts or discussing plans for the ranch. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence. 2 weeks after her arrival, Samuel brought up the subject they had both been avoiding. We should probably go into town soon, he said over breakfast. Get you some fabric for new dresses, pick up supplies, introduce you to people. He paused, then added carefully, and we should talk about the marriage ceremony. Margaret's stomach clenched. She had been so focused on adjusting to daily life that she had almost forgotten the practical matter of actually getting married. When were you thinking? Whenever you're ready. Samuel kept his tone casual, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. There's no rush, but people in town know I sent for a mail order bride, and they'll have questions. It might be easier if we were actually married. Easier for you, you mean? For your reputation. Easier for both of us, he corrected. Right now, you're in a strange position living with a man you're not married to. No legal rights to anything here. If something happened to me, you'd have no claim to the ranch, no protection. Marriage gives you legal standing. It makes this really your home. He had a point, though Margaret suspected he was also motivated by his own desires. She had seen the way he looked at her sometimes, quickly glancing away when she caught him. There was attraction there, carefully controlled and never acted upon, but present nonetheless. What if I'm not ready? She asked quietly. Then we wait. Samuel met her eyes steadily. I meant what I said, Margaret. I want a willing partner, not a woman who feels trapped. If you need more time to trust me, take it. If you decide you don't want to marry me at all, I'll respect that. And if I do marry you, she forced herself to ask the question that had been haunting her. What then? What will you expect? Samuel's face flushed, but he did not look away. I would hope that eventually we would have a real marriage, share a bed, build a family, but I would never force myself on you. When and if that happens, it needs to be because you want it, not because you feel obligated. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable, but determined to be honest. I won't lie and say I don't want that. I do, but I want you to want it too. I want you to come to me willingly, not from fear or duty. His honesty was disarming. Margaret had expected a man to demand his rights, to take what he wanted. Instead, Samuel was offering her choice, control, time. I need to think about it, she said finally. Take all the time you need. But that night, lying alone in her room, Margaret made her decision. She was tired of being afraid, tired of living in limbo. Samuel had proven himself over and over in the past 2 weeks. He kept his word, controlled his temper, respected her boundaries. He was kind and patient and decent. She might not love him yet, but she trusted him, and trust was more than she had ever hoped for. The next morning at breakfast, she said, I'll marry you. Samuel looked up from his plate, hope and caution warring on his face. Are you sure you don't have to? I'm sure, Margaret interrupted. You're a good man, Samuel, better than I believed existed. I want to be your wife. I want to build a life here with you. I want to try. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. Then we'll go into town this Saturday and talk to Reverend Mills. We can have a simple ceremony, just the Reverend and a couple witnesses. Unless you want something bigger. Simple is perfect. That Saturday, they made the trip into Paso Robles in the wagon, Margaret wearing her best dress, which was not saying much. Samuel had offered to buy her new clothes first, but she wanted to be married before spending his money. It still felt presumptuous, despite his insistence that what was his was now hers. The town was busier than it had been on the day she arrived, with people shopping and visiting on the weekend. Several men called out greetings to Samuel, their eyes curious as they looked at Margaret. Samuel kept a protective hand on her elbow as they walked, not restraining but guiding, a subtle message that she was under his protection. Reverend Mills was a white-haired man with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He invited them into his study and listened as Samuel explained the situation. A mail-order bride, the Reverend mused. Not uncommon out here, but I like to make sure all parties are willing. He looked directly at Margaret. Miss Turner, are you entering this marriage of your own free will? Has Mr. Xavier coerced or threatened you in any way? No, Margaret said firmly. Samuel has been nothing but kind and respectful. I want to marry him. The Reverend studied her face for a long moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied. Very well, I can perform the ceremony next Saturday afternoon, if that suits you both. I'll need 2 witnesses. Do you have anyone in mind? I can ask Tom and Sarah Brennan, Samuel said. They run the general store, and I know them well. Arrangements were made, and then Samuel took Margaret to the general store to meet the Brennans and buy supplies. Tom Brennan was a stocky man with a booming laugh, while his wife Sarah was a plump woman with a warm smile and shrewd eyes that assessed Margaret thoroughly. So you're Samuel's intended, Sarah said, coming around the counter to take Margaret's hands. I'm so glad to meet you, dear. Samuel's a good man. He'll treat you right. Thank you, Margaret said, meaning it. You'll need proper clothes for the ceremony, Sarah continued, already steering her toward a display of fabric. What were you thinking? Something simple and practical, I'd imagine, but nice enough for a wedding. Margaret looked helplessly at the bolts of cloth, overwhelmed by choice. I don't know. I haven't had a new dress in years. Sarah's expression softened with understanding. She glanced at Samuel, who was talking with Tom across the store, then lowered her voice. Rough life before you came here, I'm guessing? Something like that. Well, that's done with now. Sarah pulled down a bolt of deep blue fabric. This would look lovely with your coloring, and we have some cream-colored cotton that would make a nice shirtwaist to go with it. Very practical but pretty. They spent the next hour selecting fabric, thread, buttons, and other notions. Sarah gave advice freely, and Margaret found herself relaxing in the older woman's competent presence. It felt good to be treated like a regular customer, a regular person, rather than something broken or shameful. Samuel paid for everything without comment, also picking up ranch supplies and groceries. When they were loading the wagon, Sarah pulled Margaret aside. If you ever need anything or just want to talk, you come see me, she said quietly. Life out on a ranch can be lonely for a woman. You need friends. Thank you, Margaret said, touched by the offer. I'll remember that. On the ride home, Samuel was quieter than usual. Finally, he said, Sarah's right, you know. It can be lonely out here. I hope I'm enough company, but if you need more, if you want to spend time in town or have people visit, that's fine. I don't want you to feel isolated. I've been alone most of my life, Margaret said. Being with you doesn't feel lonely. He reached over and squeezed her hand briefly, a gesture that made her heart skip. She was getting used to his gentle touches, even beginning to crave them. The warmth of his hand, the solidness of his presence, it made her feel anchored in a way she never had before. The week before the wedding passed quickly. Margaret worked on sewing her new dress, and Samuel threw himself into ranch work with nervous energy. They were both on edge, carefully polite with each other, the weight of what was coming making everything feel momentous. The night before the wedding, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the hills. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, the air finally cooling after another hot day. Are you nervous? Samuel asked. Terrified, Margaret admitted. Me too. He leaned back in his chair. I keep thinking about all the ways I could fail you, all the ways I might not be enough. You've been more than enough so far. So far, I've been on my best behavior, Samuel said wryly. Wait until you see me in a foul mood, or sick with fever, or drunk after a cattle sale goes well. Do you get drunk often? No, maybe 3 times a year, and only in town where I can walk home. I don't like losing control. He glanced at her. Does that worry you? The drinking? Not if you don't get mean. The words came out sharper than she intended, revealing old fears. Never, Samuel promised. I get philosophical and maudlin, according to Tom, but never mean. Then I think I can handle that. They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to appear. Margaret thought about the next day, about standing in front of the Reverend and promising to love and honor and obey. That last word still stuck in her throat, the legacy of 8 years under her stepfather's tyranny. But when she looked at Samuel, at his kind face and gentle eyes, she thought maybe obedience to a good man was not the same as submission to a tyrant. I should go to bed, she said eventually. Big day tomorrow. Margaret? Samuel stood as she did. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever our marriage becomes, I want you to know I'm grateful you took a chance on me, that you were brave enough to come all this way and trust a stranger with your future. You're not really a stranger anymore, she said softly. Then on impulse, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. His skin was warm and rough with stubble, and she felt him freeze in surprise. Good night, Samuel. She went to bed with her heart pounding, both from the boldness of the kiss and from the look on his face, hope and joy and longing all mixed together. Tomorrow she would marry him. Tomorrow she would begin a new life. Tomorrow everything would change. The wedding was exactly as simple as promised. Margaret wore her new blue dress, which Sarah had helped her finish. Samuel wore his best suit, looking uncomfortable in the formal clothes, but undeniably handsome. The ceremony took place in the church, with Reverend Mills presiding and Tom and Sarah Brennan serving as witnesses. Margaret's hands shook as she repeated her vows, but her voice stayed steady. Samuel's vows were spoken clearly and firmly, his eyes never leaving her face. And then the Reverend was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Samuel was lifting her hand to his lips and kissing it gently, a gesture that sent warmth flooding through her. Congratulations, Mrs. Xavier, he whispered. Mrs. Xavier. Margaret Xavier, a new name for a new life. After the ceremony, the Brennans insisted on hosting a small celebration at their house. A few other townsfolk joined them, neighbors and friends of Samuel who were curious to meet his bride. Margaret was overwhelmed by all the names and faces, but everyone seemed kind and genuinely happy for them. Sarah drew her aside at one point, pressing a small wrapped package into her hands. A wedding gift, she said with a knowing smile. For tonight. Later, when they were alone in the wagon heading home, Margaret unwrapped the package and found a beautiful white nightgown, far finer than anything she had ever owned. Her face flamed as she understood the implication. Samuel glanced over and saw what she was holding. His own face reddened, but he said only, "That was kind of Sarah." They rode in silence for a while, tension thick between them. Finally, Margaret said, "Samuel, about tonight." "Nothing has to happen tonight," he interrupted quickly. "We're married now, yes, but that doesn't mean anything has to change immediately. You can keep your room, I'll keep mine. We'll take things as slowly as you need. Is that what you want?" "What I want is for you to be comfortable and happy." He pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. "Margaret, I desire you. I won't pretend otherwise. But I desire your willing participation more than I desire the act itself. So if you're not ready, we wait. A week, a month, a year, however long it takes." His honesty made it easier to be honest in return. "I'm not sure I'll ever feel ready. I'm not sure I know how to do this, how to be a wife in that way. My mother never explained, and everything I've heard makes it sound painful and frightening." Samuel took her hand gently. "It doesn't have to be painful, and it should never be frightening. With patience and care, it can be good for both people. But that takes trust and time and communication." He squeezed her fingers. "We have time. There's no rush." When they arrived home, Samuel helped her down from the wagon and carried their packages inside. The house felt different now, charged with new possibilities and new tensions. Margaret excused herself to change out of her good dress, and when she emerged, Samuel had built a fire in the main room, even though the evening was warm. "I thought we could talk," he said, gesturing to the chairs by the fireplace. "Really talk about what we both want from this marriage." So they talked. Samuel explained his dreams for the ranch, his hope for children eventually, his desire for a partnership where decisions were made together. Margaret spoke haltingly about her fears, her scars, her slow-growing trust in him. They talked about practical matters, how to divide chores, how to handle money, whether to hire help as the ranch grew. And gradually, as the fire burned down to embers and the night deepened around them, they talked about intimacy. Samuel explained patiently what happened between a husband and wife, answering Margaret's embarrassed questions with matter-of-fact honesty. He told her about desire and pleasure, about the importance of willingness and communication, about taking time to learn each other's bodies. "I won't say I understand everything you've been through," he said finally. "I can't know what it's like to live in fear that way, but I promise I'll be patient. I promise I'll never take more than you're willing to give, and I promise that if you say no or stop or ask me to wait, I'll respect that immediately. Always." Margaret looked at this man who had become her husband, at his open, honest face and gentle eyes. She thought about the past weeks, all the small kindnesses, all the patience, all the careful respect for her boundaries. She thought about how safe she felt with him, how his presence had gone from frightening to comforting. "I'm willing to try," she said quietly. "Not everything, not tonight, but I'd like to try some things, to see what it's like when it's not violent." "We'll go slowly," Samuel promised. "You tell me what's all right and what's not, and I'll listen." They moved to his bedroom. Their bedroom now, Margaret supposed, though she was not ready to give up the security of her own space permanently. Samuel lit a lamp and then stood awkwardly, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Margaret laughed, surprising herself. "You look terrified." "I am," he admitted. "I've never been with a woman who's been hurt the way you have. I'm afraid of doing something wrong, of scaring you or hurting you without meaning to." His vulnerability made her brave. She crossed to him and took his hands. "Then we'll figure it out together. Both of us uncertain, both of us learning." She let him kiss her, tentatively at first, and then with growing confidence when she did not pull away. His lips were soft, his hands gentle where they cupped her face. When he deepened the kiss, she felt a flutter of something that might have been desire, strange and unfamiliar, but not unpleasant. They moved slowly, Samuel constantly checking that she was all right, Margaret learning to voice her boundaries. When he touched her in ways that made her tense, he immediately stopped. When she guided his hands to places that felt good, he paid attention and learned. It was awkward and occasionally uncomfortable, but it was nothing like the violence she had feared. They did not consummate the marriage that night. Margaret was not ready for that yet, and Samuel did not push. But they learned each other's bodies in less intimate ways, learned what touch felt like when it was tender rather than brutal. And afterward, when Margaret was drowsy and surprisingly content, Samuel held her and stroked her hair until she fell asleep. She woke in the deep night, momentarily disoriented to find herself in an unfamiliar bed with someone's arm around her. Panic flared briefly until she remembered. Married. Safe. Samuel. She relaxed back against him, and his arm tightened slightly in sleep. This was her life now. This man, this ranch, this vast California sky. It was all so different from anything she had imagined, so much better than she had dared hope. There would still be struggles ahead, she knew. Trust was not built in a day or even a month, but they had made a beginning, and that was enough. The weeks that followed were an education in what marriage could be. Samuel was patient but persistent, coaxing her out of her shell bit by bit. He taught her to ride horseback, staying close as she learned to trust the horse beneath her. He showed her the full extent of the ranch, pointing out landmarks and boundaries and places of particular beauty. He included her in decisions about the cattle, the finances, the future of the property. And slowly, carefully, they learned intimacy. Margaret discovered that her body was capable of pleasure, not just pain. Samuel proved a careful lover, always attentive to her responses, willing to stop or slow or change direction as needed. The first time they fully consummated their marriage, 3 weeks after the wedding, Margaret cried, but this time from relief and unexpected joy rather than fear. "I didn't know it could be like this," she whispered afterward, curled against Samuel's side. "I thought it would hurt. I thought I would hate it." "This is how it should be," Samuel said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Two people choosing each other, giving and receiving pleasure equally. This is what I meant about partnership." I was so stupid before, so ignorant. You weren't stupid. You were misinformed and traumatized. There's a difference. He tilted her face up to look at him. Margaret, you're one of the strongest, bravest people I've ever met. Don't mistake survival instincts for stupidity. As summer turned to fall, Margaret settled fully into her new life. She made friends in town, particularly with Sarah Brennan, who became something of a mother figure. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, the seasons of cattle raising, the endless cycle of work that kept a homestead running. She even began to enjoy the isolation, the way she and Samuel could be entirely alone in their small world. They talked about having children, but agreed to wait a while. Margaret wanted time to heal more fully, to be stronger before taking on the responsibility of a baby. Samuel agreed readily, content just to have her, to build their partnership before expanding their family. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Samuel said, I need to go to San Francisco in a few weeks. There's a cattle auction, and I want to buy some breeding stock. It's a 4-day trip each way, plus a few days in the city. I hate to leave you alone that long, but take me with you, Margaret interrupted. Samuel looked surprised. It's a rough trip. Long days in the saddle or on the stage. Rough accommodations along the way. I don't care. I want to see San Francisco. I want to go places with you. She reached for his hand. I don't want to be the wife left behind while you go have adventures. I want to be part of it all. A slow smile spread across his face. Then you'll come with me. We'll make it our first real trip together, a sort of delayed honeymoon. The trip to San Francisco was everything Samuel had warned and more. The roads were rough, the inns basic, and after days in the saddle, Margaret ached in places she had not known could ache. But it was also wonderful, seeing new places, experiencing new things, all of it with Samuel by her side. It made her feel alive in a way she never had before. San Francisco itself was overwhelming, a bustling city perched on hills overlooking a vast bay. The noise and crowds made Margaret nervous at first, but Samuel stayed close, his presence a steady anchor. They attended the cattle auction and Samuel successfully bid on several head of prime breeding stock. They explored the city, ate in restaurants, walked along the waterfront. One afternoon, Samuel took her to a photographer's studio. I want a portrait of us, he explained. Something to hang in our house to remember this time. They sat stiffly for the camera, Margaret in a new dress Samuel had bought her in the city, Samuel in his good suit. But when the photographer suggested they move closer together, Samuel's arm came around her shoulders, and Margaret leaned into him naturally. The resulting image captured them looking at each other rather than the camera, Samuel's expression tender, Margaret's showing the beginnings of a genuine smile. On the journey home, exhausted and saddle-sore but happy, Margaret said, "Thank you for bringing me, for including me. Thank you for wanting to come, for choosing to be part of my life, my adventures, my everything." Samuel reached across the space between their horses to touch her hand briefly. "I love you, Margaret. I don't think I've said that properly before, but I do. I love your strength and your courage and your slowly returning smile. I love who you're becoming as you heal. I love you." Margaret's throat tightened with emotion. "I love you too. I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to say that to anyone, but I do. I love you, Samuel." They made it home to the ranch in mid-November, driving their new cattle before them. The house looked welcoming in the late afternoon light, and Margaret realized with a start that she thought of it as home now. Not Samuel's home that she lived in, but her home. Their home. Winter came to the California hills, bringing rain and cooler temperatures, but nothing like the harsh winters of Pennsylvania. Margaret spent the short days working on indoor projects, sewing curtains for the windows, braiding rugs, organizing and reorganizing the kitchen. Samuel worked on repairs and maintenance, projects that had been put off during the busy summer and fall. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other, or playing cards, or simply talking. Sometimes Samuel would play his harmonica, surprising Margaret with the sweet, melancholy music he coaxed from the simple instrument. Sometimes they would make love, learning new ways to please each other as Margaret's confidence grew. Christmas came, and they hosted the Brennans for dinner. Margaret cooked for days, determined to show her gratitude to Sarah for all her kindness. The evening was warm and full of laughter, and after their guests left, Samuel pulled Margaret into his arms and waltzed her around the main room to music only he could hear. "What are you doing?" she asked, laughing. "Dancing with my wife, celebrating our first Christmas together." He spun her in a circle, "Celebrating the fact that you're happy." "You are happy, aren't you?" "Yes," Margaret said, surprised by how completely true it was. "I'm happy." As winter turned toward spring, Margaret began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited to be sure before telling Samuel, afraid to raise hopes that might be dashed. But as her monthly courses failed to come a second time, and morning sickness began to plague her, she knew. She told him one evening in March as they sat on the porch in the first real warmth of spring. "Samuel, I think I'm going to have a baby." He went very still, then turned to her with wonder in his eyes. "Are you sure?" "Fairly sure. All the signs are there." Samuel let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the corral. He pulled Margaret into his arms and spun her around, then set her down quickly. "Should I be doing that? Am I hurting you?" "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Margaret said, laughing at his sudden caution. "But yes, maybe no more spinning." They sat back down, and Samuel took her hand, his thumb rubbing gently over her knuckles. "I'm going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "We're going to have a child." "Are you happy?" Margaret asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy? Margaret, I'm ecstatic. Terrified, but ecstatic." He pulled her close, cradling her against his chest. "We're going to be a family. A real family." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Samuel became almost comically protective, insisting Margaret rest more and work less. She tolerated his fussing with amused patience, knowing it came from love. Sarah became an invaluable source of advice and support, sharing her own experiences and helping Margaret prepare for the baby's arrival. In early October, as the hills turned gold again and the heat began to ease, Margaret went into labor. Sarah came to help, along with the town's doctor. Samuel paced anxiously outside the bedroom, allowed in only briefly to hold Margaret's hand and offer encouragement. The labor was long and painful, testing Margaret's endurance. But she was strong from a year of ranch work, and Sarah and the doctor were experienced. As night fell and the stars came out, Margaret gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Samuel came in when it was over, his face white with worry until he saw Margaret sitting up in bed, exhausted but smiling, with a small bundle in her arms. He approached slowly, almost reverently. "A son," Margaret said softly. "We have a son." Samuel sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny red face peeking out of the blanket. "He's perfect," he breathed. "Absolutely perfect." He looked up at Margaret with tears in his eyes. "Thank you. Thank you for this gift, for your strength, for everything." "What should we name him?" Margaret asked. They had discussed names over the months, but never quite decided. Now, looking at their son, Samuel said, "What about James? After my father." "James Xavier," Margaret tested the name. "I like it. And we can call him Jamie when he's small." Little Jamie proved to be a good baby, healthy and strong, lunged when he wanted attention, but generally content. Margaret discovered that motherhood came more naturally than she had feared. The fierce, protective love she felt for her son surprised her with its intensity. This tiny person was hers to protect, to nurture, to love. No one would ever hurt him the way she had been hurt. She would make sure of it. Samuel was a devoted father, taking to the role with the same patience and care he had shown in becoming a husband. He would walk Jamie around the house when he fussed, sing to him in his deep voice, hold him for hours so Margaret could rest. The sight of her strong rancher husband cradling their tiny son never failed to make Margaret's heart swell. As Jamie grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch prospered. Samuel's careful breeding program paid off, producing calves that sold for premium prices. They were able to hire 2 ranch hands, easing the workload and allowing Samuel more time with his family. They added on to the house, building a proper nursery for Jamie and a second room for future children. Margaret's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and extras to sell in town. She became known for her preserves and baked goods, and Sarah sold them in the general store. It was Margaret's own money, earned from her own work, and the independence it represented meant more to her than the actual coins. Life was not perfect. There were hard times, a drought that tested their water resources, a winter illness that swept through the area, the constant challenges of ranch life. Margaret still had days when the old fears surfaced, when a sudden noise or movement would send her heart racing. But Samuel was always there, patient and steady, reminding her she was safe. On their 3rd anniversary, as they stood on the hill overlooking the ranch with 2-year-old Jamie toddling between them, Samuel said, "Do you remember when you first arrived? How frightened you were? I remember expecting you to be like my stepfather. I remember flinching every time you moved." Margaret watched Jamie chase a butterfly, his delighted laughter carrying on the breeze. "I could never have imagined this happiness, this peace." "You gave me that too," Samuel said, slipping his arm around her waist. "I was lonely before you came. I had the ranch, but no one to share it with, no purpose beyond survival and slow expansion. You gave me a family, a reason for everything I do." Margaret leaned into him, comfortable in his embrace in a way that once would have been impossible. "I want more children," she said. "I want Jamie to have brothers and sisters. I want this house full of noise and chaos and love." "Then that's what we'll have," Samuel promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. And over the years, that's exactly what they got. 2 more sons arrived, Michael and Thomas, both healthy and rambunctious. Samuel hired more help, expanded the ranch further, built a reputation as one of the most successful cattlemen in the region. Margaret became a pillar of the small community, organizing church socials and helping newcomers settle in. But through all the growth and change, the core of their life remained the same. The partnership they had built from broken beginnings, the love that had grown from patient trust, the family they had created together. Margaret never fully lost the scars of her past, the shadows that sometimes crept in, but she learned to live with them, to acknowledge them without being controlled by them. On their 10th anniversary, Samuel commissioned an artist to paint a portrait of their family. They posed in front of the house, Samuel and Margaret, with Jamie, now 12, and his younger brothers, 9-year-old Michael and 7-year-old Thomas. The artist captured them perfectly, Samuel's hand on Margaret's shoulder, her hand resting on Jamie's head, the boys trying to stand still but unable to completely contain their energy, the house and land stretching out behind them. When the portrait was finished and hung in their parlor, Margaret stood before it for a long time, taking in every detail. This was her life. These people were her family. This place was her home. The frightened mail-order bride, who had arrived a decade ago, barely existed anymore, replaced by this strong, confident woman who had learned she deserved happiness. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, coming to stand beside her. "I'm thinking about how far we've come, how different everything is from what I expected." She turned to him, rising on her toes to kiss him. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am that you were patient enough to let me heal, brave enough to show me what love really means." "I'm the one who's grateful," Samuel murmured against her lips. "You took a chance on a lonely rancher and gave him everything he never knew he needed." That evening, after the boys were in bed, they sat on the porch, as they had done hundreds of times before. The ranch was quiet, the stars brilliant overhead, the air soft with the promise of spring. Samuel held Margaret's hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her skin. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been if you hadn't answered my advertisement?" he asked. "Sometimes," Margaret admitted, "but not with longing, just curiosity. I think I would have survived somehow, found some way to escape my stepfather eventually, but I don't think I would have found this happiness, this wholeness. You gave me that. We gave it to each other, Samuel corrected. I needed you just as much as you needed me, maybe in different ways, but just as deeply. Margaret thought about that first day, stepping off the stage into the blinding California sun, terrified and braced for violence. She thought about the moment Samuel had held her while she cried, the gentleness that had begun to crack open her protective shell. She thought about all of the small moments of kindness and patience that had built their love, brick by brick, into something solid and lasting. I used to think love was a cage, she said quietly, something that trapped you, that gave others power over you. But what we have, this isn't a cage. It's freedom, the freedom to be fully myself, flaws and fears and all, and know I'm still loved and valued. That's all I ever wanted to give you, Samuel said, the space and safety to become whoever you were meant to be. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their sons growing up. Jamie proved to have his father's talent with horses and cattle, taking on more responsibility on the ranch as he matured. Michael showed a scholarly bent, devouring every book he could get his hands on and talking about going to university. Thomas was the wild one, always climbing trees and getting into scrapes, keeping his parents perpetually worried and amused. Margaret's hair began to show threads of silver. Lines appeared at the corners of Samuel's eyes from squinting into the sun. But they aged together, comfortable in their shared life, their love deepening with time rather than fading. When Jamie was 20, he brought home a young woman from town, shy and sweet, and announced his intention to marry. Margaret saw echoes of herself in the girl's nervous demeanor and went out of her way to make her feel welcome, to show her what a loving family looked like. Samuel built Jamie a house on the far end of the ranch property, ensuring his son could have independence while staying close. Michael did go to university in San Francisco, returning during summers and holidays full of stories and ideas. Thomas took over more of the day-to-day ranch operations, his wild energy channeled into the hard physical work he loved. And through it all, Samuel and Margaret remained the center, the foundation on which everything else was built. Their love story became legend in Paso Robles, the mail-order bride and the gentle cowboy who had built an empire from patience and partnership. On their 25th anniversary, the entire town turned out for a celebration. The Brennans, now elderly but still sharp, gave a touching speech about watching Samuel and Margaret's love grow. Their sons, now men themselves, talked about the example their parents had set. Friends and neighbors shared stories of Margaret's kindness, Samuel's fairness, the respect they had earned throughout the community. But the moment Margaret treasured most came later, when the guests had left and she and Samuel were alone on their porch, watching the sun set over land they had built together. 25 years, Samuel marveled. A quarter of a century. The best years of my life, Margaret said simply. Every single one of them. Even the hard times, the droughts and illnesses and worries, even those, because we faced them together. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you remember what you promised me that first day? That you would never hurt me? I remember. You kept that promise. Every single day for 25 years you kept it. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. You'll never know what that means to me. How much courage it gave me to trust again, to love again, to believe in goodness again. Samuel turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. His face was weathered and lined now, his hair more gray than brown, but his eyes were the same startling blue-green that had caught her attention that first day. Margaret Xavier, loving you has been the greatest privilege and joy of my life. You made me better than I was. You gave me purpose and family and happiness beyond anything I imagined. And I swear to you, for whatever years we have left, I will continue to keep that promise. I will never hurt you. I will always hold you when you need holding. I will always be your safe place. And you will always be my home, Margaret whispered, tears flowing freely now. You and this place and the life we built. This is where I belong. They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, two people who had found each other across distance and damage and fear, who had built something beautiful from broken beginnings. The mail order bride who had cried when he did not hit her, and the cowboy who had held her and let her weep, and in doing so had begun a love story that would endure for decades. As darkness fell and stars emerged one by one, they went inside to the house that had witnessed their entire journey together. The portrait of their young family hung in the parlor, joined now by photographs of their sons grown and married, of grandchildren beginning to arrive. The walls held memories of 25 years of laughter and tears, struggles and triumphs, all the moments that made up a life fully lived. Margaret looked around at it all and felt a deep, abiding contentment. She had survived her past. She had built a future. She had found love in its truest, deepest form. The frightened girl who had stepped off that stage was gone, replaced by this strong woman who knew her own worth and power. And beside her, Samuel smiled, reading her thoughts as he so often did after a quarter century together. Not bad for a mail order marriage, he teased gently. Not bad at all, Margaret agreed, taking his hand and leading him toward their bedroom. In fact, I'd say it turned out perfectly. That night, and for many nights to come, they lay together in the comfortable intimacy of long partnership, grateful for the journey that had brought them here, content in the knowledge that they would face whatever came next together. The ranch thrived, their family grew, and their love continued to be the foundation on which everything else was built. Years later, when grandchildren asked Margaret about how she met their grandfather, she would smile and tell them it was fate or luck or the desperate courage of a young woman with nowhere else to turn. But in her heart, she knew it was something more profound, the unlikely miracle of two broken people finding each other and discovering that together they could heal. That love, real love built on respect and patience and choice, could transform everything. Samuel had given her the space to cry, and in holding her while she wept, had given her the safety to begin healing, and she had given him purpose and family, and the deep satisfaction of knowing he had helped someone rebuild their shattered world. Together, they had created something neither could have achieved alone. As they grew old together on their California ranch, surrounded by family and prosperity, they never forgot those early days of fear and patience, tears and tentative trust. Those memories made the present that much sweeter, proof that even the most damaged hearts could learn to love again, and that the gentlest touch could be more powerful than any force. The mail order bride who had cried when he did not hit her became a matriarch known throughout the region for her strength and kindness. The cowboy who had held her and let her weep became a pillar of the community, respected for his fairness and integrity. And together, they wrote a love story that would be remembered long after they were gone, a testament to the transformative power of patience, respect, and genuine love. In the end, Margaret Turner Xavier lived to be 78 years old, dying peacefully in her sleep with Samuel holding her hand. Samuel followed less than a year later, unable to bear life without his partner. They were buried side by side on the hill overlooking the ranch, where they had stood so many times together, watching the sun rise and set over the land they loved. Their descendants continued to work the ranch for generations, each one knowing the story of how it all began with a frightened young woman and a gentle cowboy, with tears and patience, with healing and hope. The house still stood, expanded and modernized, but fundamentally unchanged, still a home built on the foundation of that first unlikely love. And sometimes, in the quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the oak trees and the sunset painted the hills gold, those who loved the ranch swore they could sense them, Samuel and Margaret, forever together, forever home, forever proof that love could conquer even the deepest wounds and build something lasting from the most broken beginnings. Their story became more than just family history. It became a legend, passed down through generations as a reminder that gentleness has power, that patience can heal, that love built on respect and choice is stronger than any force. The mail order bride and the cowboy who had shown her what real love meant became symbols of hope for anyone who had been broken, proof that it was never too late to heal, never too late to trust, never too late to find genuine happiness. And in that way, their love story never really ended. It continued on in the lives they had touched, the family they had built, the example they had set. Margaret's courage in choosing to trust again, Samuel's patience in earning that trust, their mutual commitment to building something beautiful together, all of it echoed forward through time, inspiring others to believe in the possibility of healing and transformation. The ranch house stood as a monument to their love, every board and beam a testament to what they had built together. The land thrived under the care of their descendants, the cattle growing fat and healthy on the same pastures Samuel had first claimed. The creek still ran through the property, never quite drying up even in the driest summers, a constant like the love that had created this legacy. When their great-grandchildren explored the old house, finding love letters Samuel had written to Margaret over the years, discovering the first advertisement that had brought her west, uncovering photographs of their life together, they were seeing more than family history. They were seeing proof that damaged people could heal, that love could be gentle and still be passionate, that partnership built on equality and respect could last a lifetime. Margaret's story, in particular, resonated through the generations. Women who had been hurt, who had learned to flinch and cower and expect pain, heard about the mail order bride who had cried when she was not hit, and they understood. They understood the depth of her fear, the courage it took to trust again, the slow, painful process of learning that not all men were violent, that not all touch had to hurt. And Samuel's story mattered too. Men learned from his example that strength did not mean dominance, that power properly used meant protecting, not controlling, that real masculinity involved patience and gentleness and respect. His legacy was not just the successful ranch or the prosperous family, but the example he had set of what a good man could be. Together, their story became a blueprint for healing and building, for taking broken pieces and creating something whole. It showed that marriage did not have to be a cage or a battleground, but could be a partnership of equals working towards shared dreams. It proved that love could be both passionate and peaceful, that desire could coexist with respect, that families could be built on foundations of trust rather than fear. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, as the world changed in ways Samuel and Margaret could never have imagined, their story remained relevant. Because the fundamental truths they had lived, that healing takes time, that gentleness has power, that love built on choice rather than coercion is stronger and deeper, those truths were eternal. The ranch eventually passed out of family hands, sold when the last direct descendant moved to the city. But the new owners, learning its history, treated it with reverence. They preserved the original house, kept the family cemetery on the hill, maintained the records and photographs that told the story of Samuel and Margaret Xavier. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light slanted just right across the hills, when the wind carried the scent of grass and oak, visitors to the ranch would feel something, a sense of peace, of rightness, of love that had soaked into the very soil. They would stand on the porch where Samuel and Margaret had sat for so many evenings, and they would understand that this place had been built not just with wood and nails, but with patience and tears and healing. The mail order bride who had cried when he did not hit her, and the cowboy who had held her and let her weep their story, was complete now, lived fully and closed with their peaceful deaths in old age. They had achieved everything they set out to do and more. They had built a successful ranch, raised good children, created a lasting legacy, but more importantly, they had proven that love could heal, that damaged hearts could learn to trust again, that gentleness was stronger than violence. Their love story, begun on a hot July day in 1876 when Margaret stepped off that stage in Paso Robles, had run its full course through 53 years of marriage, 3 sons, multiple grandchildren and great-grandchildren, countless sunrises and sunsets over their beloved California hills. It had weathered droughts and illnesses, hard times and good times, all the challenges life could throw at two people. And through it all, the foundation had held the foundation of respect and patience and genuine love that they had built in those early days when Margaret was learning to trust and Samuel was proving himself worthy of that trust. In the end, theirs was a love story that affirmed the best possibilities of the human heart, the capacity for healing, for growth, for building something beautiful from broken beginnings. It was a story that said, no matter how damaged you are, no matter what you have survived, it is never too late to find love and happiness. It is never too late to trust again, to risk again, to believe again in the possibility of goodness. And that message, carried forward through generations, touching lives far beyond their own immediate circle, was perhaps the greatest legacy Samuel and Margaret Xavier left behind. Not just the ranch or the family, but the proof that love, real love built on patience and respect and mutual choice, could transform everything, that the gentlest touch could heal the deepest wounds, that holding someone while they wept could be the beginning of a love story that would last a lifetime and echo through the ages. Their story was complete. Their love had triumphed. And in the hills of Paso Robles, in a small cemetery on a ranch they had built together, Samuel and Margaret Xavier rested side by side, together in death as they had been in life, forever proof that even the most broken hearts could heal and that love built on the right foundation could last forever.